Thank you very much. And I would like to welcome Jacob Teter. Jacob will give us an overview on the transportation sector. Jacob, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Mostafa, for the invitation to share with you a bit of the IEA's work on hydrogen and fuel cell electric vehicles. In the next 10 minutes, I'd like to just give a glimpse of some of the aspects of the tremendous amount of work that the IEA has done in the past couple of years on hydrogen's role in the clean energy transition in road and maritime transport, and even a bit on aviation, but I will be focusing on road. Also, at the end of the presentation, I'll provide a few links to IEA reports that explore the issues introduced here in more depth. And I wanted to give my thanks to my colleagues, Jose and Elizabeth, who also contributed to the material here. So in this overview, I want to give a high-level kind of overview before zooming in on the role that hydrogen could play in the future of transport. First, I'll outline the role that hydrogen plays in the IEA's sustainable development scenario, a scenario that not only achieves the Paris targets, but also the goals of reducing air pollutant emissions and universal energy access. Next, I'll present our latest data on fuel cell electric vehicle and hydrogen refueling station deployment worldwide, focusing here on how China has rapidly overtaken other countries in terms of FCEV deployment and how China's strategy differs in certain ways from other countries. Building on this, I'll show how the ramp up in fuel cell electric vehicle sales to date mirrors the progress that was made in the early 2010s in electric cars, and how the hydrogen ministerial's ambitions for the coming decade would require roughly replicating the successes that EVs have seen over the past decade. I'll then highlight some of the considerations for how FCEVs might compete with and complement battery and plug-in electric zero-emission vehicle powertrain architectures. And finally, I'll put this story about fuel cell electric vehicle deployment into context by showing the role that hydrogen plays in the IEA's sustainable development scenario. So with the global energy sector facing an unprecedented transformation, the versatility of hydrogen is attracting strong interest from a diverse range of stakeholders, including governments, renewable energy suppliers, electricity and gas utilities, automakers, oil and gas companies, as well as some startups focusing, for instance, on new electrolysis technologies. The reason that hydrogen has the potential, the reason is that hydrogen has the potential to help overcome several challenges that the energy system is facing. It can help integrate greater amounts of variable renewable energy, the availability of which is, of course, not always well matched with demand. It also offers a promising low-cost option for storing electricity over long periods. It offers a way to decarbonize a range of sectors, including iron and steel, chemicals, or as we'll focus on a bit here, heavy-duty regional long-haul transport, where it is currently proving, as you said in the introduction, difficult to meaningfully reduce emissions in line with the kind of more promising trends that we've seen, say, in electricity generation. It can be produced from all fuels, renewables, nuclear, natural gas, coal, and oil. And although, of course, as an energy carrier, it can't be directly produced, it can be converted to other products like, or when it can't be directly used, it can be converted to other products like ammonia, synthetic methane, synthetic liquid fuels, and methanol. And hence, it's likely to play a role in decarbonizing shipping and aviation. This is beneficial also, this versatility, to improve energy security. Everybody knows there have been a lot of false starts for hydrogen in the past, but this time at the IEA, we think the result could be different if several key challenges can be overcome. First, hydrogen today is almost entirely supplied by natural gas SMR, coal gasification in the case of China, with big implications for CO2 emissions. So it's necessary to produce hydrogen from low carbon energy, and that's costly at the moment. And the costs of low carbon production need to be reduced both through policy and technology levers. The development of hydrogen infrastructure is slow and holding back widespread adoption, and there are real chicken and egg challenges, especially in road transport, that need to be thought through and eventually overcome. And finally, there are even some regulations that can limit the development of a clean hydrogen industry, and these need to be kind of overhauled. So there's a lot of momentum, and of course it's coming in the countries where policy support has been the strongest, and things are evolving quite rapidly. Things have changed a lot even since 2017, when the US and basically California accounted for half of the fuel cell electric cars on the road. The picture has changed quite a bit. In Japan, the sales have continued to steadily grow. Korea has gone from about 100 fuel cell cars on the road in 2017 to more than 5,000 in 2019. Sales in Germany, France, and the UK and other countries in Europe have risen as well. But the most interesting story, I think, is the rise of fuel cell vehicles in China. This has occurred almost entirely since 2018. And what stands out in China, in contrast to all the other market leaders in FCEVs, is the disproportionate focus on light-duty trucks and buses. Indeed, the strategy that China seems to be pursuing in adopting fuel cells and hydrogen refueling stations is very much in line with where our analysis for the future of hydrogen found it to make the most near-term sense in the road sector. You may all well have heard the story, the rationale behind this, but basically when you compare the total cost of ownership across various modes in terms of applications for road vehicles, it may come as no surprise that the best near-term value proposition for fuel cell electric vehicles is in intensively used fleets. This might also include light-duty vehicles, commercial vehicles with high daily mileages. For instance, a lot of battery electric fleets like commercial vans in Europe have been equipped with fuel cell range extenders when they didn't meet the needs of the fleet operators. But it crucially also includes heavy duty vehicles with high energy and power needs operating on fixed and ideally hub and spoke routes and fueling at single and large hydrogen refueling stations. And by going the route of commercial vehicles that operate intensively as opposed to private cars that stay parked 95% of the time, and by taking advantage of byproduct hydrogen from chemical industries like chlor-alkali production, China has found a niche where the high capital costs, initial capital costs of rolling out vehicles and their infrastructure are offset by delivering hydrogen at low prices. So where do we stand then in terms of what many countries are hoping is the initial stage in a ramp up of fuel cell electric vehicles that will mirror in a lot of ways the rapid market adoption that we saw with battery and plug-in hybrids. In terms of vehicle stock, we went from just under 1,300 fuel cell vehicles on the road in 2018 to more than 25,000 in 2019, almost a doubling. But if we compare this to the 7.2 million EV cars and 2 million EV car sales, and the lag, then we see that the lag between fuel cell electric vehicles and battery or plug-in vehicles is a little less than a decade. This means that 1% of all zero emission vehicle sales globally in 2019 were fuel cell emission vehicles. And what you see here are official national targets going out to 2030. And they imply a little more than a million fuel cell electric vehicles on the road by 2030. There's also the call by the Hydrogen Ministerial's Global Action Agenda to get up to 10 million fuel cell electric vehicles on the road by 2030. And doing that would roughly require mirroring the same success that electric vehicles have seen over the past decade in the coming decade. Right now, fuel cell electric cars are very expensive and purchases are heavily subsidized. As production of fuel cells and hydrogen tanks ramp up, economies of scale can do quite a bit to reduce the purchase price of fuel cell cars so that in the future, if not today, they may be able to achieve cost competitiveness with other future zero emission options in the car market, exemplified here by battery electric vehicles with 400 kilometers of range. At that stage, delivering hydrogen at low prices while also ensuring that it is low carbon can improve the competitive prospects of fuel cell electric cars. And the figure here is, of course, very simple. The reality is, of course, much more complex. Range extenders, as I mentioned, are already being extensively used in various regions of China, Rugao included, where their high utilization plus the availability of affordable hydrogen makes them a valuable asset for the fleet managers that want to maximize the utilization of their assets. In the long term, the mix of low carbon fuels and powertrains will be determined by the trajectory of cost reductions and performance improvements, including in energy and power density, as well as the durability of batteries and fuel cells, and the cost of delivering these competing to energy carriers, electricity and hydrogen. Assuming that the cost of delivering hydrogen at the pump can be brought down to less than $5 per kilogram, and also assuming that fuel cells can be mass produced to meet the performance targets envisioned by OEMs and the government, fuel cell trucks would compete favorably against battery electric trucks at ranges above around 400 to 500 kilometers, opening up a crucial niche in the regional and long-haul trucking segment, which together account for the majority of today's fuel demand in the road freight sector globally. So what is the IEA vision for how hydrogen can contribute to mitigating not only road transport emissions, but emissions across the energy sector? What will need to happen, as is shown in these figures, is a scale up from roughly the 75 million tons of hydrogen that are produced every year today, mainly for oil refining and the chemical industry, and where hydrogen contributes to only about 1% of total final energy demand, to an expansion of hydrogen to new applications. The steps towards rollout of hydrogen in the IEA's sustainable development scenario, which achieves net zero emissions by 2070, would result in a significant growth in hydrogen demand, reaching more than 500 megatons or 13% of final energy demand by that year, 2070. Crucially, transport applications, both in the form of direct hydrogen use in fuel cell electric vehicles or hydrogen derived fuels, such as ammonia in the case of shipping or synthetic jet fuel in the case of aviation, are the main demand sector of this growth. While of course, hydrogen is critical also to decarbonizing the chemicals and heavy industry sector. By 2070, hydrogen and ammonia would need to meet more than 50% of the final energy demand in shipping and more than 40% in aviation, and around a third of the demand in road transport, mainly for the use in medium and heavy duty trucks. In the sustainable development scenario, the rapid ramp up in low carbon hydrogen production is not achieved based on green hydrogen alone. Rather, SMR with and coal gasification production will need to be equipped with CCS, or even potentially with ways of using emitted hydrogen, especially in the initial stages where cost barriers for electrolysis with renewable electricity are likely to simply be too high to overcome. And what we see here are that as the prospects for scale economies and for the use of hydrogen to store energy from electricity production bring down the costs of variable renewables and bring down the cost of electrolysis, green hydrogen starts to compete and eventually emerges as the dominant means of hydrogen production. So I just wanted to conclude by showing this slide. All of these reports are recent reports by the IEA over the past 2 years that have focused either on fuel cell electric vehicles or on the role of hydrogen that the IEA envisions in the future energy system. And thanks for your attention, and my apologies if I went a bit over time.
Excellent summary. Thanks, Jacob, so much. I think greatly laid out the work of globally where we are in terms of zero emission vehicles and where we might be heading. And I think it also lays the floor quite well for William, who will be talking to us a bit more specifically on the EU and the EU hydrogen strategy and how transportation fits in there. William, all yours.
Thank you so much, Mostafa. So first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's great to be here. Hydrogen is a topic that that is being discussed all the time in Brussels these days, as you will all know. Me myself, I've been with Transport and Environment for 10 years. I've in the past led our trucking work, and I've been the executive director of the organization for the last 3 years. Now, what I will do in the next couple of slides, I'm actually not going to give you an overview of the EU plans on hydrogen because I'm not the representative of the European Commission. I'll give you my perspective on what the Commission is planning, and I think that will also be a reflection of what we think is necessary. I think the starting point, and this is well known to all of you, is that transport is now the biggest climate problem that we have in Europe, and I think that's true across major developed economies that transport is really the major issue we have. We haven't managed to reduce emissions since the 1990s, and even actually pre-COVID, the last couple of years, emissions were going up. Now, the emissions, if you know, in Europe, most of the emissions still come from passenger cars, light-duty vehicles with vans, then it's trucks, and then the two hard-to-abate sectors, aviation and shipping. Now, our challenge is to completely decarbonize this system in the next 30 years. And what that means is that we're going to have to completely replace petroleum fuel by a different type of fuel, a zero emission fuel or zero emission energy system. The starting point for us in this discussion, and you know, we've been following the energy debate very closely, because the energy system is the basis for what happens in the mobility system. And the clean power revolution that we have seen over the last 15 years has completely changed the way we look at the future of the transport sector. I come from an organization where 10 years ago, we were working on fuel economy standards, on efficiency, because we wanted to optimize everything as much as we could. The rise of clean electricity, which currently accounts for almost 60% of European electricity, has completely changed the game. And so the basis of a future zero emission mobility system will be clean electricity. And you know, just to reiterate that we are making fantastic progress on electricity across the world, but also particularly in Europe. Now, there are two main options in the transport system to decarbonize based on electricity. Either you do it directly or you do it indirectly. I think that's well known to all of you. Now, there are, you know, the way we look at this, we are, in principle, we're technology neutral when it comes to zero emission solutions. We have always advocated for regulations, for policies, for fiscal policies that promote the uptake of zero emission vehicles and fuels. So we have never said you should only give subsidies to batteries, you should only require car makers to produce or sell battery electric vehicles. But I think there are a few considerations that are important in this debate. And those considerations are linked to the scalability of the different solutions. And I think it's clear to me, at least, that if you compare direct electrification with indirect electrification, that there's just a big difference in efficiency between hydrogen and direct electrification. If you go to power to liquids or power to methane, the difference is even greater. Now, that doesn't that doesn't mean that hydrogen isn't possible, but it does raise a concern about scalability. We ran a modeling exercise two years ago, looking at what the energy demand would be, or the additional electricity requirements would be, if we would try to completely electrify the European transport system. What it shows is that depending on whether you go for direct electrification or indirect through hydrogen or synthetic fuels, that the additional electricity requirements are really very, very different. If you go for a hydrogen-based system or a synthetic fuel-based system, you have to more than double current electricity generation simply to power land transport. So even talking about the shipping and aviation sector, and it's not even mentioning what we would do with the industry sector, which is the other big potential user of hydrogen. Now, I think it is not for us as a green group, or it's maybe not even up to policymakers to specifically decide which technologies are used in which sectors. I think we need to give the market a chance, but I think it's an important consideration. If we would go for a complete hydrogen economy, the electricity needs would be incredible. Now, there's a big discussion also about and that was shown in the IEA slides. We're not just talking about green hydrogen, we're also talking about blue hydrogen. I think it is, there is potentially a role for blue hydrogen, but I think we're also, there's also some serious concerns about the ability of blue hydrogen to actually achieve the emission reductions that we need to go towards a Paris compliant world. And if you look at this slide, some of the emissions associated with blue hydrogen can maybe be mitigated further, lowered further, but it's a real concern. Now let me go through the different modes, and let me start with the modes that I actually want to spend most of my time talking about trucks, because that's what I'm most interested in at this stage, where I have a number of questions also to the other panelists. But where I think it's pretty straightforward is the passenger car sector. If you look at the European car market, not my opinion, not anyone else's opinion. You just look at what car makers are planning to produce in the next 5 years. They're not planning to produce any significant number of fuel cell vehicles. If they're not planning to produce them, they're not planning to sell them, and that to me says that the race in the passenger car market, as far as I can tell, is essentially over in Europe. And I think it's going to be, it might well be true that the type of scale up that you need is similar to where we were with cars 10 years ago. But meanwhile, the battery electric sector has advanced quite a lot. If you look at the investments that are happening right now, the gigafactories that are being built, I think it's going to be extremely hard, if not impossible, for hydrogen cars to catch up. Where I think it's also pretty straightforward is the aviation sector, and I very much agree with the analysis that was shown by the IEA. In aviation, there is no alternative to hydrogen or hydrogen-derived fuels, particular drop-in fuels such as e-fuel, synthetic kerosene. I think it's really encouraging to see that the European Commission is considering a mandate that would require airlines to start using a progressively growing share of sustainable aviation fuels, but in particular also hydrogen-based e-fuels. The situation for the shipping industry is very similar. Shipping cannot conceivably be decarbonized by direct electrification. You cannot do biofuels at the scale that is required to supply that sector with energy. So the only scalable and sustainable option that you have at your disposal is either hydrogen or a hydrogen-derived fuel such as ammonia. Now, let me focus the rest of the presentation on the heavy-duty segment, because this is really where most of the discussion in Brussels is focusing. We have no view on whether it should be battery electric or hydrogen, but we've been trying to understand what the pros and cons of the two solutions are. And based on the modeling and the estimates that we make, we think that actually it's a very, very close race, that the main benefit that hydrogen has compared to battery electric trucks, and I'll share the slides so that everybody can have a look at the assumptions, and you can criticize them and tell us that we need to change them. But the main thing that hydrogen got going for it is that it is, from a refueling point of view, it is just much quicker, and the flexibility it gives to the haulage sector is much greater than battery electric potentially. From an economic point of view, we actually think that battery electric trucks could be quite competitive. We also think that the weight issue that has been much talked about is much smaller than people think, because weight exemptions have been granted to heavy duty vehicles in Europe, which means that actually most of the additional weight of the battery of the truck, you don't have to count it according to EU regulations. So it's there's no weight penalty from battery trucks. Now, if you look at what I see as the main challenges for the two technologies, I think it's clear that for battery electric trucks, there's a big issue with charging. That is big issue with range and a big issue with charging. But the idea that we could run trucks on batteries for 400 or 500 kilometers is no longer inconceivable. There was the announcement by Tesla some years ago, but now we see that European manufacturers such as Daimler, and the biggest truck maker in the world, they're also coming forward with a 400-kilometer battery electric truck. And so as the costs go down and as the density of the batteries goes up, to go to vehicles that can do 500, 600, 700 kilometers on a single charge, that is no longer inconceivable. Then the issue becomes, can you roll out a charging network that is sufficient to supply those big trucks with the big energy needs they have? I think so that is one of the main questions. There's also a question on grid stability, and the question is, can we get sufficient scale in batteries to reduce the costs so that it becomes attractive for the trucking sector? I think similar concerns exist on the other side. On the hydrogen side, the question is, can you get the cost of the hydrogen fuel distributed and delivered at the pump down low enough to make it cost competitive and attractive for the haulier? Can you roll out a hydrogen refueling system across Europe? Can you get the hydrogen from the big pipelines? Because people now seem to think that the cheapest, most convenient way to ship hydrogen around is a pipeline. So how are we going to get hydrogen to places where we don't have pipelines? And I think this is really my main question. Can we get the scale for the fuel cells and for the tanks in what is, in the end, a relatively small sector. The logic was always we're going to get scale in the passenger car segment. In Europe, that's 15 million cars a year. That's a lot. It's a lot of vehicles. If we have to do this with with what is only part of the trucking sector, can we still get the scale and can we still get the cost down? Those are questions. And then also a reminder. Actually, a lot of time is spent talking about ultra long haul trucks that do 1,000 kilometers. The vast majority of trucks in Europe, and that also is true for other parts of the world, don't actually drive 1,000 kilometers on a daily basis or on a trip basis. Trips are much shorter. Now, and I will end it here. I think the most important thing is not the discussion about which technology will work best in what situation. We don't need to make all those choices. The market can make those choices. The question is, how do we create scale and how do we go from hype to hope? And I think the experience that we have as an NGO is that the role of regulation is really absolutely essential. We are seeing we're seeing the share of electric vehicles sold in Europe grow from 3% in 2019, growing to 10% in 2020. This is because of the CO2 standards. We expect something similar to happen in California, where they've introduced a zero-emission truck sales mandate. Once truck makers have to sell those vehicles, they will look for the cheapest, best, most optimal solution to comply with the targets. And so, it is important to spend a lot of public money. It's R&D is important. The Hydrogen Alliance is very important, but the most important thing, in my view, is to create a regulatory framework where we give investment certainty to the entire hydrogen ecosystem, so that the investments can be made to supply aviation with e-fuels, to supply the shipping industry with ammonia, to potentially supply the trucking industry with hydrogen, and also supply truckers with the vehicles. And I will leave it there. I look forward very much to the other presentations, where hopefully some of my questions will be answered.
Thank you very much, William, and apologies once again for cutting in the middle. Next, I think we will have Professor Jean-Pierre, who will share with us a couple of examples on France. So we're going a bit more like from a global to a regional place, and then afterwards we will have an example of Switzerland. But first, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mostafa. Thank you for inviting me to this workshop. Are you seeing my my presentation on the screen? Is that okay?
Not yet. Now we are.
Okay, good. So I will talk about hydrogen mobility in France. Actually, I will review a number of projects that have been going on in France for a number of years. So I will talk about some lessons that are coming from this project. We'll see that they face a number of challenges, and I will try to mention possible ways to overcome these challenges, and I will conclude by a general recommendation. Before doing that, let me very briefly review the French hydrogen plan. It is going to be going on for 10 years with 7.2 billion euros. In the next 3 years, we'll be having 3.4 billion euros. Most of the funds will go to decarbonize industry, and it will be focused on the deployment of large-size electrolyzers. But mobility will be also concerned with trucks, buses, trains, utility vehicles. We'll come back to that shortly. New usage, as was mentioned, like in the future, boats, planes, also playing a role in improved sustainability in heating and electricity network. Now, I should say that in France, we, as probably a number of you knows, we like to have champions. And this project is supposed to develop French industry as well as European industry, I should say. There has been hydrogen plants all over Europe in a number of states, and these are supposed to be coordinated through the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. I will see if it works in the future. Now, here are a number of projects and that I would like to discuss. Actually, three of them I'd like to discuss. The first one is EasyMob project that started in 2014 in Normandy. The idea was to deploy 15 hydrogen refilling stations. And it was supposed to be focused on the Renault Congo with the fuel cell range extender, the technology that was mentioned earlier in the presentations of this workshop. Another project which is similar but started 3 years later is the Zero Emission Valley in Region Rhône-Alpes. They're supposed to deploy 20 hydrogen refilling stations. Well, as we can see from now, these two projects have been falling short in terms of volumes of hydrogen. They have difficulty to generate a demand which is high enough to get this refilling station get some profitability. We'll try to understand why they had some problem like that. A third project which is working better is the IPE project, which has been deployed in Paris. If you come to Paris, you will see hydrogen taxis. We're expecting to have at least 600 hydrogen taxis in Paris. A taxi drives about 100,000 kilometers a year. So with 600, you have a high volume of hydrogen. Actually, there are 3 refilling stations that seem to work properly. One in Alma, in center of Paris, deployed at when the COP21 was in 2015. And this, you could think of that as a greenwashing strategy for a number of the ones that were behind that. But that's not really true. That project seemed to work quite well. Now with 2 other hydrogen stations in the 2 airports, and the third one being deployed in Versailles. And the guy behind this project is planning to have similar taxis, hydrogen taxis in other cities. So we have some lessons to draw from these 3 experiments. The problem is first a local challenge. A local challenge is that hydrogen refilling stations have a high setup cost. They need to be filled with demand, and this is not as easy as it could seem. The way is to build on a captive fleet, such as these taxis, and the opportunity to build on captive fleets in the 2 other projects I mentioned was quite difficult. In the future, we may think of mutualizing usage. For example, there will be regional hydrogen trains to be developed in Europe, and in particular in France. That may be an opportunity to mutualize usage and facilitate the profitability of hydrogen refilling station. Another problem is that this project requires the elaboration of a financial business plan that will gather subsidies from levels at local, regional, and at the European level, which is not so easy to organize. We cannot see, that was mentioned at the presentation just before, that there is a low involvement of European car manufacturers. That's also the case in France. The energy suppliers, on the other hand, are pretty well engaged in the hydrogen deployment. Now, there is also a global challenge, which partly explain why it was so difficult to generate volumes in terms of vehicles. This has been mentioned also. It's the high purchase cost of vehicles. Now, this brings me to a 4th example, which I will describe shortly. This 4th example is concerned the fuel cell electric buses. Fuel cell electric buses, well, we see that we are still quite low in terms of comparison with China. But at least, this is a promising example, because we see for the fuel cell electric buses how a European strategy which was built on the Joint Initiative for Hydrogen Vehicles across Europe, known as JIVE. This program was very good in terms of encouraging, consolidating the demand for fuel cell electric buses all across Europe. You can see that in France, you know, the three cities that participated in this program generated ridiculously low volume of buses, five in Auxerre, 5 in Pau, and 5 in Toulouse, you know. Well, you cannot certainly get, you cannot generate, you know, economies of scale, learning by doing with such low volume. So that's a real problem because the local challenge has to be faced locally, but it is not enough. You have to consolidate this regional cluster to generate a high demand to reduce the cost of vehicles. And I think the fuel the fuel cell electric bus is interesting to be analyzed in this way. So if I, you know, this also staying with this example, we can see, you know, that this program has generated quite a high level of competition in producing fuel cell buses in Europe. You have, you know, traditional manufacturers such as Van Hool that are a large part of that, but there has been new entrants such as Safra in France. There's also Sertano Bus in Portugal, a number of other entrants. So the competition in the market will certainly be good for reducing the high cost of the bus. So this I think is interesting in the sense that we can think that to solve, you know, this local and global challenge for the deployment of hydrogen in mobility, we can think of a scenario that involves 3 stages: a takeoff stage, a powering up, and a cruising stage. If we consider, you know, battery electric vehicle, we may be in a number of countries in the powering up or cruising stage. In particular in Norway, we certainly are in the cruising stage. At that stage, you can withdraw a number of public subsidies, at least as long as you have a reasonable carbon tax. At the powering up, you should, you know, try to facilitate exchanges between the regional cluster. But in many countries, I think in Europe, we are at the takeoff stage at the hydrogen for hydrogen deployment. And I think it would be a bad strategy to try to jump too quickly to the second or the third stage. That would be my say, global recommendation for the deployment of hydrogen. These considerations drove from a number of publications that I will not go through here. There's also some articles for a larger audience. All of them are actually available on the website of the Chair Energy and Prosperity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that excellent presentation, and giving us a glimpse of what's happening in France. I guess now we just do a quick trip to the neighboring country, Switzerland, and we'll hear from Rolf about H2 Energy and their collaborations and what they're trying to do in that space as well. Rolf, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Mostafa. Now, all right. So can you see my screen? Okay, thank you very much. I would like to give you an overview about what we're doing in Switzerland. We no longer are in the stage of actually doing a demo project or a pilot project or whatsoever. Actually, we're really commercializing the hydrogen economy in Switzerland. It all had started, to give you a short overview about our company, with about 10 years ago when a group of people joined together, and we basically saw at this point of time, when we turned around a few numbers, that hydrogen was definitely needed in order to make the energy transition happen. And at this point of time, you were really still an outsider when you came up with, or actually a stupid fool when you had the concept of hydrogen being really a vital technology for the future. So what we did is relatively quickly, we were trying to develop an entire system, because we didn't think it was just about introducing vehicles or something like that, but was more about building ecosystems. And you know, at this time, everybody took the fossil-based hydrogen, whereas we really started from the very basic. And that is why we have developed, and we were trying to find partners, but we didn't find the partners. So we basically did it mostly on our own, except for a company, Cope, which is the second largest retailer and now the largest retailer in Switzerland, that supported us here. So we installed an electrolyzer site very close to a run-of-the-river plant. We installed a filling container ramp. We couldn't find a truck, so that's why we, together with two engineering companies, took an MAN truck and basically electrified it and put the fuel cell inside. It didn't go that smoothly now as it might sound now. A lot of mistakes were made. I would say a lot of learnings were made. So at this point of time, it was good to have a small system only, because you could still then correct it and then learn for when you actually were about to be building a better, larger and better system. And now here you see the first refueling station in Switzerland that was inaugurated in 2016. All of that was established in less than a year. And it was really massive work for us. You know, once that was all up and running, a lot of people were astonished that this could work, this could happen. And of course, we had a lot of data on the retailers and on the customer behaviors and specifications of the trucks, as well as on the interfaces to the electricity companies and so on and so forth. And we were asked to build many more trucks. And since we knew how many mistakes we were doing at the point of time, we knew we could not redo that like 100 times again. And we were thinking that probably would be a better idea to involve an OEM, but it was really hard to find an OEM. We visited basically, I would say, all of the big OEMs, certainly the European OEMs, and were constantly turned down. Up until we didn't give up, and then we thought about, well, is there potentially a solution in Asia? So we approached Hyundai, and as a leading fuel cell technology company, we approached Hyundai and then asked them about their interests and appetite in because we knew they were having their own commercial vehicle division, and we were actually starting to engage them to building a hydrogen truck for Switzerland. And why Switzerland? Because in Switzerland we could really make it work from the very beginning. We kind of had very limited resources available, and the first project was heavily, nicely subsidized, I would say, by the Department of Energy in Switzerland. I'll come to that later. But in Switzerland, it is like such as if you scale up an idea, you will not find any subsidies. So we had to be viable on an economic point of view from the very beginning. And now we have one tweak that we and one advantage here in Switzerland, and that is a road tax that we have, because if you drive through the Alps, you have to pass the tunnel of Gotthard, and since everybody was passing this tunnel, there was a huge political debate, and then, you know, on top of that, then there was a tax basically applied to all the trucks in order to subsidize then a train line that would upload the containers and from north to south. So that was actually sort of an emission tax, and there were some exemptions from that tax, which were electrified trucks, because at the point of time there were no electrified trucks. So if you have an electrified engine, you are exempted from that tax, and that tax is pretty massive. and it's based on the payload times the distance that you would cover. So, but why did we actually focus on trucks? I think there's, you see here a few reasons. And there were some talks on battery versus fuel cell, and I actually hate this question because I hear it over and over and over again. With regards to heavy duty trucks, I have to tell you that basically the efficiency is much higher for hydrogen trucks because you have much less payload. And if you're talking about efficiency, you don't have to look at the ratio on the total weight of the truck, but on the payload of the truck versus the energy needing to actually transport that. And if you do that calculation, you will find out easily that actually the negative, I would say, efficiency of the fuel cell is by far being compensated by the amount of more payloads that you do have on the vehicle. But so with the truck, what you could do is, first of all, we could make it economically viable. We'll see that in a moment. And then, you know, you can actually scale up at higher volumes. And you need not that many HRS to start with. So we basically started with the concept where we had a dual system at the hydrogen refueling station. So you have 350 bars for the truck on one side, and then you have basically an 700 bar for the passenger cars. So, and that is absolutely with zero subsidies. And on the back of this project, as kind of a byproduct, we actually are now seeing a hydrogen infrastructure being developed with absolutely zero subsidies. And how does that work? I think that's the key logic behind it. So what we do have is really an entire system. And what's the pros and cons of this entire system? I mean, the cons is it's very complex to build it, and it's you know, it's rather difficult to get all the people together. But it is, you don't have any excess capacities, so you have to think about all the value chain elements on the value that they create and on also the margin they need to actually generate in order to make them do this. So actually you should go the other way around. So we built the system as such as, you know, we made the trucks function. And with that, we knew exactly what the trucks at the max was able to be, you know, paying for the renewable hydrogen. And we did only do renewable hydrogen. There is no kilo non-renewable hydrogen that we actually fed into the trucks. And then, you know, we kind of saw how much margin does the hydrogen refueling station need in order to build. And how much then, you know, will these other guys need in order to generate the electricity? Here you see a run-of-the-river plant in Niedergösgen. Here on this space is actually now this equipment here, which is a 2 megawatt PEM electrolyzer. And here you see exchange containers, right? So we designed an entire system, talked with all of the parties, and made everybody earning enough. I mean, they always are complaining, of course, they would love to earn even more, but just enough to actually do it. And so what you see here is actually 3 parties. It's Hyundai Hydrogen Mobility, which is a joint venture between Hyundai and us. And then there is independent petrol station owners that want to switch toward renewable energy and hydrogen refueling stations in this dual concept. At the later stage, when you have many trucks, the trucks will probably be concentrated and be refueled at the distribution centers. But for now, they will actually be refueled at the public filling station up until, you know, you have enough infrastructure so the passenger cars can actually come and profit from that infrastructure. And then you have a company called Hydrospider, and with Hydrospider we produce renewable energy. We are not connected to the grid on this electrolyzer equipment. There is a direct connection to the power generator here. And we balance that and we harvest the cheapest 15 minutes and we produce the hydrogen. So this is basically the system. We plan for 1,600 trucks in this model. And up until then, we will have roughly about 100 megawatt by actually 2035. It says 2033, but it will be 2035. It will be 1,000 trucks by the end of 23. Yeah, probably some of you have already seen some impressive pictures. We have also handed over the trucks recently to the customers. And now the customers are doing all this social media stuff for us. They're very proud. Everybody has its own movies now, and it really gets going. And now we have 20 trucks out there now. We have 30 more to come this year, and it will basically pile up. Next year we will receive about 150, and then Hyundai puts it on the larger line with the capacity of 2,000 vehicles. Here you see from a different angle the 2 megawatt side here, the process unit with the compressor. Behind that you see the power supply, the cooling unit. Underneath there is some pipelines feeding into these exchange containers with filling panels. We had to, with some engineering company, construct this element where you can drive underneath and very quickly pick up the 20-feet container and then basically transport it right to the stations. This is on the backyard of the station, and here you see the station in St. Gall with the truck. Now, I was asked to describe the roadblocks, and you know, I would say, you know, what were the challenges up to now and what are most likely the challenges to come. I think the biggest challenge was really to getting everybody together. Not only getting them together, but having, you know, them really, or actually, you know, generating their appetite to invest in the initiative. There's always the fear that somebody is earning more or less and whatsoever, and that was really, or still is, quite of a challenge. And then you know, we had to design the business model because we were doing the private funding, you know, thing, and we didn't use any subsidies in the commercialization. There's a lot of cultural aspects and so on and so forth. You know, this other stuff. I mean, COVID also did not help, of course. The challenge up to come, I think, the competition is way too slow. Also, the technology in Europe is really lagging behind. There's a lot of discussions, but I would rather see some more activities in the technology development. And you know, also there's so many distractions from large numbers that all of these people talk about, and you know, I mean, those are sort of the challenges that we see currently. We would much more like to see a more open market and more entrepreneurial spirit in actually what we do. We were very nicely supported, I have to tell you, by the Swiss government. However, you know, they are not spending any dime in or any cent or any Swiss Rappen into what we're doing right now. But they were really supporting us as a Swiss startup when it all started. They kind of provided financial support to build the first ecosystem. We were very pragmatic. It was not a hell lot of administrative burden. We didn't have to wait for ages to get started. Very end product focused, pre-diagnostics, and they were not so religious about whether battery or whatsoever was bad, you know, worse or bad. And they were engaging and support and sending actually their top level science institutes helping us. And we have also a few people that joined our company after that, and made really great, you know, kind of impact here at H2 Energy. And yeah, so so much from our side. I very much thank you for having the chance to talk about Switzerland, which is very rarely on the map of any discussion in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolf, very much for that insight on H2 Energy and on Switzerland in terms of hydrogen. Next, we have Stefan and David, who will speak about Canada. Stefan will give us an overview of generally like the transportation sector in Canada, and then David will speak about the freight transport. I know we're a bit tight on time, but I would ask everyone if you want to stay a bit longer to just be able to give their time, and then go through a bit of the discussion and questions. Thank you, Stefan.
Thanks, Mostafa. So my presentation focuses on Canada, the transportation sector and hydrogen-related activities in our country. So I'll mostly talk about road transport. I'm not focusing on marine shipping or aviation, simply because in those areas, hydrogen-based solutions are still quite far away from commercialization. Really briefly, Clean Energy Canada is a think tank. We're based at Simon Fraser University, and we're working on a range of clean energy technologies and policies. The transportation sector is the second largest contributor to Canada's emissions after the oil and gas sector. Transportation accounted for 25% of total national emissions in 2018, around 185 megatons of CO2 equivalents. Transportation emissions are also a major source of emissions growth. Between 1990 and 2018, emissions increased by 54%. And this growth was mostly driven by emissions from heavy-duty trucks and passenger light trucks. Light trucks include SUVs, minivans, and pickup trucks. As we've heard before, decarbonization options for transport include electrification and hydrogen. And hydrogen is especially interesting for heavy-duty vehicles where electrification options are limited. Now, when you look at vehicle registrations by type of fuel in Canada, you'll see that electric vehicles have seen strong growth in the past few years. Those are the red bars on the left, top left. It's still a small share though compared to new vehicles with internal combustion engines. When you put those red bars side by side or on top with gasoline and diesel vehicles, you'll get the graph on the bottom left, where you basically see since new registrations since 2011. And those red bars.
Sorry to interrupt your presentation. I think is not showing just for the.
Oh. It's not showing.
Thank you.
Can you see it now?
Excellent. Yes, thank you.
Yes. Okay. I was in full screen mode, maybe. Yeah. So thanks for telling me about that. So I talked about the new vehicle registrations. Those are the graphs on the left. And I should say that fuel cell electric vehicles cannot be seen on these charts because so far they're close to zero in Canada. Statistics Canada, which is the government agency collecting statistical information and reporting on it, they're actually not reporting fuel cell electric vehicles separately. They're combined in a category together with vehicles running on liquid propane and natural gas. And for all of these, there were less than 200 new registrations in 2019. As for infrastructure, there are currently more than 5,000 electric charging stations across Canada, but only 4 hydrogen fueling stations so far. So there's significant growth in zero emission vehicles, but so far that's been only battery electric and not hydrogen fuel cells. Looking at the global level, we know that hydrogen is likely necessary to meet net zero targets, along with electrification, CCUS, and bioenergy. The IEA's sustainable development scenario, as we heard earlier this morning, morning my time, shows a pathway to net zero by 2070. And in that scenario, global hydrogen use in transportation rises significantly in the decades to come. Transport would account for 30% of hydrogen use in 2070 in that scenario. That's the graph on the left. In terms of emissions, the IEA estimates that hydrogen could account for 8% of global emissions reductions by 2070 in this scenario. So that's a big chunk of those reductions would be from transportation. And a net zero 2050 would require even more hydrogen, so even a more aggressive deployment. Hydrogen solutions are expected to play a significant role, especially for decarbonizing segments like heavy duty, long distance trucking, where batteries are not likely to be technically feasible, especially for really long distances. I suspect that they would be much longer in a vast country like Canada compared to the European situation. And according to Bloomberg NEF, with the necessary policy support, heavy-duty vehicles could actually be cheaper to run using hydrogen than diesel by 2031. Now let's look at some activities on hydrogen for transport in Canada. So in 2017, hydrogen tech companies in Canada had revenues of more than $200 million and employed over 1,600 people in the country. Companies based in Canada include Ballard in British Columbia. That's a well-known developer and manufacturer of fuel cells. Hydrogenics in Ontario, which builds hydrogen generation and fuel cell products. They also have a power to gas demonstration plant that is running in Ontario. New Flyer in Manitoba, which is North America's largest manufacturer of transit buses and motor coaches. They have assembled fuel cell buses for demonstration projects in the past. And companies like H-Tech in British Columbia, which provides hydrogen supply solutions, including fueling infrastructure. I also want to mention a rail project. In 2018, the province of Ontario released a favorable feasibility study for exploring the use of hydrogen fuel cell powered trains on its GO transit network. So there was a favorable feasibility study, and hydrogen for freight was actually identified as a key area in Ontario's climate plan at the time. Unfortunately, there has been a change of provincial government, and we haven't heard much about this project since then. And I also want to mention something on marine shipping. Last year, Ballard announced a Marine Center of Excellence in Denmark to explore how fuel cell technology could be used in marine vessels. And lastly, Teter, I'm sure David Layzell in a moment will speak more about this project. It's a 3-year project that was launched last year. With $15 million of funding, it's testing 2 fuel cell electric hybrid trucks between Edmonton and Calgary in Alberta. And the hydrogen this project is using in these vehicles is produced in the province of Alberta. So this concludes my brief overview of hydrogen in Canada's transport sector. I also want to invite you to check out Clean Energy Canada's report on hydrogen that we released earlier this month. And although there is a bus on the title page, our report covers a range of hydrogen opportunities in Canada and abroad. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for that presentation of the overview of Canada. We will share the slides after the event, and also the documents. If you share them with us, we'll be happy to share them with attendees. And just before Professor David has the floor, if anyone has questions for later, would be great. We'll probably make it a bit shorter, but it would be nice to just have a bit of a discussion. Professor, we're very interested and excited to hear about freight transportation. Thank you for taking the time. Please. You're still.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk today. All right, that should work. So Canada is one of 73 countries of the world that is committed to net zero emissions by 2050. And I've been helping to set up and launch the Transition Accelerator, which is a not-for-profit corporation that is trying to look at how Canada can win in this transition and what are the best transition pathways. Our vision for the future in Canada's net zero energy future in 2050 is one that looks very much like the circle diagram on the chart here, where end-use demand is no longer using fuels, energy carriers like natural gas, gasoline, diesel, etc., but actually using a lot more electricity, more biomass-based fuels, and a major role for hydrogen within the energy system. Hydrogen that is produced either from renewables or from fossil fuels coupled to carbon capture and storage. Hydrogen's needed in our analysis in addition to electricity within a more sustainable energy system because some sectors really need chemical, not electrical energy carriers. Freight transportation is one of the key ones, and this has been mentioned by some of the previous speakers, also heavy industry and in Canada, which especially in very cold regions of Canada and large buildings for space heating. The other benefit of hydrogen, it really complements, it's not really a competition to low carbon electricity, it actually complements it because we have highly seasonal weather or climate in Canada, and some seasons are much better for making electricity from renewables than others, and one can use hydrogen for storage as well as for providing new markets. It's also benefits to complement biofuel production, and our analysis tells us that we can create a much more resilient energy system with hydrogen as part of it. Canada is known as among the world's lowest cost producers of blue and green hydrogen. So hydrogen with very low carbon emissions. This is a Japanese study, and we've confirmed many of the numbers in here that has looked at all the countries on the Pacific Rim countries in the world, and certainly Canada comes down here as one of the lowest cost for the production of blue hydrogen using natural gas coupled to carbon capture and storage. But we also have the lowest green hydrogen in provinces like Quebec or Manitoba that have low cost electricity that's often in surplus. So this is a philosophy that we've been using within the Transition Accelerator to grow the hydrogen economy is to really focus on the gap between, in the previous chart I should have mentioned here, that the price for making hydrogen, the wholesale cost of making hydrogen in a place like Alberta, where we can make blue hydrogen with carbon capture and storage, is about half the wholesale cost of diesel and 1/3 the retail costs. So it's this spread here between the wholesale cost of hydrogen and the retail cost of diesel and other fuels that really provides an opportunity for growth, rapid growth of a hydrogen economy. Our approach here is to use initially to start a hydrogen economy, to grow it within Alberta, is to build it on the back of the industrial scale blue hydrogen production that's already underway within the province. These are facilities that are making hundreds of tons of hydrogen a day for industrial use. And you can make it with carbon capture and storage already embedded at about $1.50 a kilogram of hydrogen. Now, these are Canadian dollars, where each Canadian dollar is worth about 76 cents American. And we're looking at putting pipelines from that to which to supply power generation, to supply space heating for commercial buildings, trucks and trains, as well as space heating for residential buildings. We're targeting a price in terms of the space heating of about $2 a kilogram, pipeline delivered gas, and about $3.50 and maybe up to $4 or so per kilogram for fuel cell quality at fueling stations. In order to get the economics to work, we need to have fueling stations that are large, in the range of 2 to 10 tons a day for hydrogen. And we certainly need to be looking at bleeding hydrogen into natural gas distribution systems where we can have a big enough system that we're talking about a ton of hydrogen a day or more in order to get the economics to a scale. So what we're looking at is piggybacking on low-cost industrial blue hydrogen production, creating substantial nearby markets for the hydrogen pipeline connecting supply and demand, and hopefully creating hydrogen corridors within Canada that will really attract hydrogen using industries and original equipment manufacturers. The place to start this is in Alberta, is in the Edmonton region. I'm from Calgary, so Edmonton's a competing city. But I have to say that they've got all the cards. What they already have is a 50-kilometer long hydrogen pipeline that starts near the city of Edmonton and goes to the northeast. And there's 2 CO2 pipelines that already are built and existing and in operation. This region in Canada now already produces about 2,250 tons of hydrogen per day. It's a highly industrialized region, and about 850 tons of hydrogen a day produced by these 3 facilities are already coupled into carbon capture and storage and are producing blue hydrogen. The city of Edmonton has a population of about 1.1 million people, so we're looking at opportunities to create markets for blue hydrogen production in that region. And when we look at these potential markets, what you'll notice that they all exist in 2 corridors. And you notice that here's the hydrogen pipeline. Here, some of the major centers for hydrogen production are along this pipeline. And what you have in these 2 corridors across this city of Edmonton are basically all the private trucking fleets are shown by the red dots here. The fueling stations to refuel those private trucking fleets are shown in their location in these stations here. The blue trucks and buses here are the municipal fueling stations to supply the, on the diesel side, to supply the it's about 1,500 or so, maybe even 2,000 trucks that are, and buses. And the X's here are the gates in the natural gas network of natural gas supply that actually do the drop-down pressure gates that deliver natural gas to residential and commercial heating networks in the city. So what we're in, the fuel market size we see for these sectors is about, by 2030, we're targeting about 400 tons of hydrogen per day. And by 2050, 2,200 tons a day of hydrogen plus export for this region. In order to put up some initial pilots in this, we've been very active over the last couple of years in working with a number of partners to put together the ACETEC project that was just mentioned by Stefan. This ACETEC stands for Alberta Zero Emission Truck Electrification Collaboration. And this involves Ballard making the fuel cells, Dana's electric axle company, electric motor company for electric axle trucking parts. Freightliner is our truck supplier. And this is being led by the Alberta Motor Transport Association and 2 of their members, Trimac and Bison Transport. And in Canada, heavy transport, these are big trucks. They're tandem B-trains, they're called, 63.5 tons gross weight for these vehicles. They do long distance transport. We don't have a great train network in Canada, so this is the way freight is moved. These trucks will be fueled in Edmonton, be driving full load to Calgary, pick up another load and bring it back. That's about 650 kilometers. So we're targeting 700 kilometers between refueling. The trucks are being designed now. We're in the final stages of designing for the trucks. The lockdown on the design is within the next week, and the road trucks will be built over the next year. And by September, October, actually with COVID, we've now pushed this to the end of October of 2021. We hope to see the trucks on the road for an 18-month pilot through the Alberta winter, which is nothing to sneeze at, and for 18 months to March of 2023. We're also working on, in order to really build demand, we're actually looking at other ways, because the opportunity we have in Alberta is the ability to produce very low cost hydrogen at quantities at fueling stations in concentrated areas. And so we're working with companies to do retrofits of diesel vehicles to take 40% hydrogen and on an energy basis, 60% diesel. And we see this in our modeling and analysis as a very important bridge technology that will actually create the hydrogen demand and make the fueling stations economically viable. Our estimate analysis is that we can bring in hydrogen pricing at lower price than diesel at the fueling station, and actually create an economic drive to get trucking companies to move over. One of the reasons that this is a very interesting technology, we see it ultimately we have to go to hydrogen fuel cell to meet the net zero by 2050. But a lot of the trucking companies are very nervous about running out of hydrogen with the lack of fueling stations. The beauty of these vehicles, if you run out of hydrogen, they just go back to being normal diesel vehicles. And so you can get the greenhouse gas advantage, you can get the economic advantage of lower cost fuel, but we can actually then grow and support the hydrogen network and corridor. We're also working very closely with the municipalities in the region to put on hydrogen fuel cell electrical municipal bus fleets, and of course with some of the train companies that are operating in the region to have hydrogen trains as well. There are 5 centers in Alberta where there's a large amount of hydrogen production that is used as an industrial feedstock, fertilizer for cracking bitumen into synthetic crude oil and making gasoline and diesel. We're piggybacking on these industries, working with them to move some of that hydrogen into fuel use across Canada. And eventually our goal within 3 or 4 years from now is to create a major corridor for heavy trucking and train movement between Fort McMurray through Edmonton to Calgary, and even then east-west to other provinces. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor David. That was great. Great to hear about that project and about what's happening in the reality translation project. Thank you all for the fantastic presentations and for your time. Definitely learned a lot, and I'm sure like the attendees were also happy. I guess we're at 5. I would say let's, if it's possible, let's have 10-minute conversation, because I guess everyone has meetings, but it would be great to just not end it here, just to have a couple of questions in the group. If that's fine with everyone, I would start with a general question that was actually prompted by William, and which is how do you see, and please, any of the speakers, you can go ahead, like how will deployment be driven? Will it be driven through regulations or the economics of the technology?
Maybe I could comment. I think it's got to be both. If you can only, at least in Canada, we tend to have swings in government. We go from a government that's a little bit left of center to some that are right of center, and it swings back and forth. So that you can put in regulation and policy in some cases that it moves it. But if you don't get the economics right, if we don't get it, the economics, so there's job creation and other opportunities, the next government swing, everything is canceled and you're set back. So my sense, it has to be both.
On this, else we can, I mean, we've heard from Rolf on road tax and MOUT, and I think also it would be great to hear more about like how the role of carbon pricing could help in driving that technology and adopting it more.
You know, it's a little bit of a political challenge, you know, to all of a sudden introduce these amounts of taxes, because for a politician, it's not very healthy to do that, as you have seen in France. So you need to do it in digestible doses, you know. But I would just tell you that. When we started this project, we actually didn't know we had this thing. We didn't know actually, you know, we could profit from this, but we nevertheless had started it. And I think in each area, in each country, you have negative things and you have motivating things, and it's about to just go there, try it out and do it, and go beyond PowerPoints. Just, you know, use your hands and make it happen. And you'll find ways of optimizing it. I mean, if you look at some countries, what they spend on subsidies, and then the subsidies are just being wasted, I don't know where. And then, you know, you have to ask yourself whether there is not a more clever way of using these subsidies. And you know, so you can still complain what you don't have, but don't expect the carbon tax to really close that gap. Because if you calculate, for instance, if you run the TCO analysis for a truck in Germany, let's take Germany. They're talking currently about $25 the CO2 ton, right? 25 euro, probably 30. They wanted it to start with 10. Now it's, I don't know exactly, something that in that dimension. Now, in order to actually fully make up for the TCO gap, you know, as of today, they need about 900 euros the CO2 ton. And there you see that basically it's probably going to take a while if you just wait until that will happen. So why don't you try to invent new stuff? And we actually have done so in Germany and in some of the other states. And there are ways. You just have to try hard enough. You know, don't write another study and another study and another study. Just go out and do it, and then you'll find out.
Please, William.
Maybe two comments. I think on the role of regulation, I agree needs to be both. I agree with David. You can't force the economy to do things that are completely uneconomical. But I think it's interesting to hear that Rolf had to, you know, Rolf is based in Switzerland, which in my mind is pretty close to the headquarters of two major trucking companies, and that you had to go all the way to Korea to find a truck maker that wanted to help you. So I think you do need a policy signal to the truck makers that we need to move beyond diesel. A pretty strong policy signal. You know, fuel economy standards, CO2 standards can provide that signal. On the role of tolls, I think this actually it's different than carbon pricing. In Switzerland, my understanding is that you pay around €1 per kilometer to drive on the highway. If you are completely exempt from that, you need a pretty steep carbon price to get the same effect. And the thing is that across Europe, we got road tolling systems. We got them in most of Central Europe. We got peage systems in other parts of Europe. You could easily introduce a type of MOUT or toll exemption, you know, for a certain period of time that would actually make it easier for new technologies to enter the market. So I think we need to look beyond carbon pricing and be a bit more pragmatic about that. Because carbon pricing is very sensitive.
Can I make a comment, Mostafa?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
From what I heard from many of this presentation, I can see that hydrogen is very much technology push, and I'd like to ask questions about demand pull. You know, how do you get the demand? And this question would be to David and to Rolf. Like in Switzerland, you know, how do you get the trucks on the road? Who is operating the trucks? Who is buying them? Now, for David, we have a number of projects in Europe also that are producing hydrogen from gas with carbon capture and use in industry. And it's not so easy to have this industry buy this hydrogen. They can compensate the low carbon on the EU ETS, on the emission trading scheme by reducing their allocation there. Is there something like that in Canada? Is the carbon price high enough to encourage the manufacturer to get involved into this project? So my question is from what I saw in France, is that it is quite difficult to engage, you know, the demand for hydrogen, and I would like to have some comments on that, if possible.
This is a very important point. We have certainly carbon pricing within Alberta for the companies that are producing hydrogen for industrial use. And if they produce hydrogen at lower than a benchmark greenhouse gas intensity, they can actually generate credits that they can basically sell into emission performance credits that they can sell. And that takes us partway towards the incentive for carbon capture and storage. The government, federally and provincially, is now very active in discussions. We're expecting another budget within the next couple of weeks that might actually put something like the American 45Q in process, which gives you credit for carbon capture and storage. That could tip the balance quite considerably. As you know from the presentation I gave, there's already considerable, over 800 tons a day of blue hydrogen being made in the province. And there are they were results of some initial demonstration projects and that have continued after the projects were launched. On the demand side, I think the key thing is there is a carbon tax on diesel fuel in Alberta, and it's promising to go up. It's now $30 a ton of CO2, and it's going to go to 40 and 50 potentially within the next few years, although there's fights in court about that. But if it does go up, it doesn't take very much before certainly the price of, and the fact that we can make hydrogen cheap enough that we could provide it, sort of in concentrated locations in fueling stations, that it becomes quite attractive for the companies. A number of the companies, there's tens of thousands of trucks even in the Edmonton region, and there are certain companies that have a brand that they want to come out as being the company that is that delivers at a lower carbon. So there is an opportunity to get more customers. And the biggest problem that we have within the trucking sector in Alberta is, is it's very low margins, but they're always competing basically to get truck drivers. They have a hard time getting drivers to do these long haul runs, and the truck drivers are really keen on hydrogen fuel cell and electric drive trucks, so they can get more drivers, and so that actually becomes an incentive mechanism. So it's part of it is the total cost of ownership that was talked about earlier, and what we're trying to do is to really work with the trucking sector and understand where they're going and what would make them want to get involved in pilots and demonstration projects and then full up commercialization. Last thing that's really important here, I think, is to recognize that there's no sense building a hydrogen economy in the trucking sector for the trucking sector of 2020. We have to build it for the trucking sector of 2030, 2035. And autonomous trucking is very huge interest here. When you start having autonomous trucks, these aren't on the road for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day. They're on the road for 23 hours a day. And they're only doing really, and initially in the next 15 years, they're going to do the long hauls between major centers. That's the target market we're looking at. And hydrogen fuel cell trucks have so much more advantages because of rapid refueling compared to an electric truck, that this is why the companies basically have told us they're not even looking at battery electric trucks. It's all about rapid refueling, keeping the trucks on the road, few moving parts, so they can be running hundreds of thousands of kilometers a year, and basically be the workhorses that are running these major long freight movements between cities. So we're trying to build hydrogen into the future of the heavy trucking sector, and my sense is focus really on target markets. Don't try to do a little bit here and a little bit there. Focus on creating major hydrogen corridors, and then companies will want to get in because they'll see a competitive advantage.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David. I guess one question for Stefan, and then we can have one last round, and then we can close it off. What do you think has the biggest potential for Canada? Which fields should we focus on now, as Professor David just mentioned? Where are the key niches that should start?
I think really industrial applications and heavy duty trucking are going to be critical to help us reach net zero 2050 targets because these are, as Bloomberg NEF calls them, hard to, or the toughest third of emissions where alternatives are really difficult to come by. And so I think it's also really important to realize that the investments that governments are making in this decade, in the 2020s, they may not drive emissions reductions until 2030 significantly, but I think it's the foundation to achieve deeper reductions by 2050. So that's really important. And I also wanted to give a quick shout out to some alternative or supplementary public policies in addition to carbon pricing that I think are also really important, that have been successfully used in California and also are developed at the federal level in Canada, like a low carbon fuel standard to really help solutions like hydrogen to become more competitive, and also zero emission vehicle mandates that not only for light duty vehicles, but also for medium and heavy duty vehicles. So yeah, just to mention those as well.
Before we close off, I'm happy to, if someone would like to share any additional points, else you can also, like we've been now going 15 minutes. Go ahead, William, please.
Yeah, I hate to keep you all, but I got one final question slash comment. When I hear the description of the Canadian plans to produce blue hydrogen at scale, and we got similar discussions in Europe. I'm frankly of two minds on this, but what concerns me is that this is completely dependent on CCS, and I'm assuming that in Canada most of the current CCS is enhanced oil recovery. So I'm just wondering if we're going to do blue hydrogen at scale in Canada, in Russia, in all those places. We've been trying to do CCS for a long time. So at scale, have you considered this?
It's about, right now it's about half and half, but I think there's a limited amount of enhanced oil recovery that one can do. And certainly at the scale we're talking about growing, it's mostly going to be saline aquifer storage, deep saline aquifer. Alberta has very holy rocks. I got lots of, this where the oil came from and the gas. And, and so that it's about basically putting the carbon back in the ground. That is certainly a challenge, but in the economic analysis that we've done, it's very hard to see how we could build it on green hydrogen. Right? We're going to need a lot more green hydrogen anyhow, just to meet the electrification needs of the future energy system, and to make enough green hydrogen to actually, as has been pointed out, it's a lot more expensive, 2 to 3 times the price in Canada, and it will come down, and eventually I think we probably need to get there, but our calculations and working with the geoscientists is that there's many decades worth of many millions of tons a year of carbon capture and storage potential. And I would argue what we need to do is use that low cost hydrogen that we can make at scale to build out the infrastructure, and then piggyback on that infrastructure with green hydrogen into the future. And one of the challenges is that as you get bigger with green hydrogen, usually the costs go up because you run out of the cheap green hydrogen, that spare that you have in the middle of the night, et cetera. And as you get bigger and bigger scale with green hydrogen, the cost goes up. As you get bigger scale with blue hydrogen, the cost goes down. And it's that really is the drive of understanding that this is a transition pathway, and where you start the pathway may not be where you end it. And I think we really need to be thinking about the energy transition as a pathway, and what do we do now? What do we do later? And my sense is that, we're really focused clearly on the goal, but say, how do we get there from here in a way that is credible and compelling and capable of achieving the goal.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was great. I want to thank each and every one of you for the presentations, for your time, and for sharing all these valuable insights. That was excellent. Thanks for staying longer, and sorry for the hiccup. We will wrap up like the slides and everything once you share whatever you want to share with us, and we can share it with panelists and the attendees. For the panelists, we'll be also sending out an email because of the closed session on 2nd of November. You're happy to join as well. That's I'll send you about that later. But other than that, it was great. Thanks so much, and have a great evening and or afternoon. All right. Bye.
Thank you all.